All right, so Adobe Premiere Pro, what is it? Well, it's the number one industry standard, most prescribed piece of software that anybody will use for any kind of video editing, whether that be YouTube or Hollywood or wherever you are. There are a couple of alternative free softwares you can use, like Blender and Lightworks, but those don't quite have the extensive suite of tools that Premiere Pro does. And also, it's only $20 a month, so if you're really serious about video editing, this is definitely the best option you can go for. So, to begin, normally you'll just have a blank black screen when you open the program, but in this case, I've already hit File, New, and then Project, and then that's brought me to this sequence right here. So first, we're going to import some media so we can actually start editing things. So I'm just going to double click over here on the import media. And I already had it open to this folder, but you'll go find the folder and then just select all the media you want to add to your project and hit open. I'm taking that entire folder in there. And so next, you'll want to create your first sequence. So that way you can actually have a timeline and start working on things. I'm going to start with this piece of river stock footage and just drag it onto my timeline, and it's going to create a sequence for me. So this object right here is the master timeline object, and you don't really want to edit that directly. You want to edit the things inside of the sequence. And if you accidentally close this somehow by clicking that or whatever, you can just double click over here and it brings up the whole timeline again. So we have our first piece of footage here, and if you just hit spacebar, or if you hit this play/pause button right here, it'll just start playing on its own, and it'll go through all of the footage until it hits the end of the timeline over here, and then it'll just be black past your last object in the timeline. So the first thing that I usually do is just add two pieces of media together and start editing them. So next, I want to add this empty beach.mp4, and if you see this little sound wave icon right here, that means that this file isn't just the footage, it also has an audio component to it, which is represented by this block below the video block that dragged with it. So I don't want that audio though, so I'm going to left click and then right click it, unlink the two objects that are linked together, and then I can select the audio separately and just delete it. So with these two pieces of footage, I wanted to blend them together as they swap between each other. Because right now, if I just hit play and let it go to the next object, it's just a straight mash cut like that. I don't want that. I would rather have an iris cross, which is one of my favorite effects in all of Adobe Premiere. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to where we had our objects and hit effects and then search up what I'm looking for. So iris cross. And then it pulls up our effect right here, and we can just click and drag it in between these two segments, and you'll see that it overlaps both of them, meaning it's going to start on one and end on the other. All right, now that we've got our effect applied, if I scroll back in our timeline and just let it play out, now it's got this awesome thing where it just turns into 4 blocks and moves out like that. It's a much more interesting thing than a mash cut in this instance, in my opinion. But I don't like the fact that this goes on for a good, well, how long does it go on for? If you left click and then go back to, or if you double left click, I'm sorry, and then look up here, this will tell you how long your clip is. I don't need this to be 13 seconds and 11 frames long. I just need this to be about like 5 seconds. So I'm going to find a good place in the timeline where I want to cut it off, and we'll say the top of this swell is where I want it to mash over to something else. And so I'll go over to my tools section right here and hit the razor tool, or I can just press C to toggle to it, and then go over to my timeline and overlay my cursor where the marker is. And you'll notice that if I move it a little bit, it'll still have those double arrows on the top and bottom, indicating that that my cut is going to snap to the marker. So click it and it'll cut exactly where I want it to go, and go over here and take the excess node and just delete it. I like to use the ripple delete in almost everything I do, because if something's in front of the object that you're deleting, then it'll automatically move everything in front of that object back so that it matches up nicely with the place that you just cut from. So hit ripple delete, and then yeah, now we have our beach scene that doesn't go on for as long as it was before. Lastly, I wanted to add a duck to this first little beach scene right here. And I wanted to fly from over here to over here, let's say. So I'll go back over to my bin over here and select my duck. Where are you? There's my rubber ducky. And click and drag, and you'll notice that it's going to snap to the upper level right here. So the way the nodes work is that if something is above something, it's going to overlay on top of that footage. So you'll see here, my duck is just now in the center of the screen, right on top of my river. But I don't want it to be there, so I'm going to double click on my duck right here, and it's going to let me start editing my duck. So we'll move him over here, right there, we'll say. And he doesn't need to be that big. He'll be a little farther away. So we'll shrink him down just like we were editing an image in Photoshop. It feels almost exactly like that, except for the part where you want to animate it. So if we come over here to the effects control panel after double clicking on our rubber duck, and then so this brings up a whole bunch of animations and other ways we can modify our duck so that he does things besides just sit there and look pretty. So we want him to move across the screen, and to do that, we're going to take our marker and just move it straight to the beginning of the clip. In this case, it's going to move it to the beginning of the image instead of the underlying footage because we're editing in the effects control panel. And we're going to add a keyframe. This will be a kind of like a starting anchor position where our duck is going to be. And we're going to add a second keyframe at the end to be the ending anchor position. And it's just going to move as though it's on a line on the screen. So we hit the little toggle animation button next to our position piece, and you can kind of see it in there as being covered by the line, but it drops a keyframe node in our effects control panel. And if we want to add a second one, we just move our timeline over here and put it right there. Or actually right there, because if you put it all the way to the end, it's going to go to the point where the duck disappears, and we don't really want to do that. So now we're going to move our duck to where we want it when we stop animating it. Hold on. And you can see the trajectory in that little line right there that kind of moves around with my duck. And so we'll put him right here, we'll say, and that made a second keyframe right there. And then if we go back to the beginning of where the duck is, he pops up and then he just starts moving across the screen. Unfortunately, my computer is a little underdeveloped to handle Adobe Premiere sometimes, and I need to sometimes render an entire sequence or a little subsequence to get it to move smoothly, because you saw how that stuttered on my computer. And there is one way we can do that. We can move our cursor to where we want to start rendering, and then hit one of these this bracket right here, the mark in bracket, and that made a little section for us. And we want to make our outro right here, just a little bit extra rendering past that. And once we've done that, we can go up to our sequence option right here and then hit render in and out. And it's going to take a second and just look at the video, make sure all the frames and files are perfectly synced up. And we wait for that to go, and then it shows us our nice smooth transition. This is best for hardware that's not particularly up to date or very well equipped to deal with all the massive power that Adobe Premiere has. And I'm looking to upgrade a computer soon. But yeah, so that's how you use the basics of Adobe Premiere.